Well, hello and welcome everyone to the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast for HR managers and business owners. Here we talk about workplace wellbeing to make everyone's lives better. That includes yours and mine. My name's Stephen Pink. I'm the CEO of Verve Healthcare, and I'm delighted to say my guest in this episode is Laura Mathias. She's, in her own words, big, bold and embracing it. I'd add the word brave to that, as she's on a mission to change how society treats people who look a bit different. As business leaders and HR managers, we all need to learn what we can do to make everyone feel included at work. And to be honest, as with all these things, I'm really looking forward to learning from what Laura has got to say. Well, Laura, hello and welcome.
Hello. How are you?
Very well, thank you. It's great to have you on here. To start with, can you tell us a little bit about your journey so far? It's really interesting.
Yeah, so I'm Laura. I'm 32 years old now. But when I was around 12, 13 years old, I developed a small bald patch on the back of my head, which quickly started spreading to lots of bald patches until I was basically rocking an undercut, like with nothing underneath and just very thin hair on top. So yeah, my hair started falling out as a teenager. It all happened in a very short space of time. The doctor told me it was something called alopecia. I'd never heard of it before, had never seen any adults talking about it before, had never seen any other teenager in my school or any other school in my town with it before. So I felt like an absolute weirdo, to be honest. I felt like I was the only one in the world going through this. And yeah, the doctor told me, have you been going through something stressful? Because that can trigger hair loss. And at the time, my parents were having a pretty messy divorce.
Right.
So it was very uncomfortable and awkward, but I was like, yes, and bearing in mind I'm sitting in the doctor's surgery and my mum's with me.
Yeah.
And the doctor basically said, well, try not to panic. Lots of times hair loss like this happens for a bit and it will grow back. So, be on your way, go back to school, do your thing. And out the door I went. And it didn't come back. And I'm sitting here in front of you now, obviously, as a bald woman, head to toe, barely any brows, no lashes.
How long ago was that again, you said? But how long ago was it?
So that was when I was 13.
Right.
And I'm now 32.
So nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I'd love to say things have changed, and I'm sure we'll get onto that, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done, hence why I want to talk to you today. But yeah, back then it was your hair's falling out, try and calm down, it will probably come back. And that is the most helpless feeling in the world, to be told there's this massive change to your body, a medical condition is happening to you. They don't really know what's caused it. They can't give you a pill or a cream to fix it. But there was an implication there that it was something to do with my stress levels and me. So I felt like I was to blame. And I didn't go back and get on with things. I completely couldn't deal with that, because the more my hair fell out, the more I couldn't disguise my visible difference of someone going bald. And so I just stopped. I literally stopped leaving the house. And despite my parents barely speaking, and when they did, screaming at each other, they both very much came together. And I remember them pleading with me to go to school, and me trying to explain to them, I just can't. I just can't. I'm terrified to be seen like this.
Wow.
And that pretty much went on for the next 6 months. I barely left the house as my hair just completely went.
Must have been a really, really difficult experience, particularly at that age. It might be difficult for anyone, but at that age, you must have felt quite alone, really, because you're going through lots of other things at the same time.
Well, that's the thing, because there's no right time to start losing your hair or go through any kind of visible difference, which I know is a term I keep saying, and we can go on to that, but I literally mean having a condition, mark or scar that in some way makes you look different from the air quotes norm.
Right.
And as a teenager, all of a sudden hormones are flying around the place, and it feels like your value is based on your attractiveness.
Yep.
And so I was already a chubby kid with eczema, and now my hair was falling out. I mean, what are the chances? So yeah, no, I mean, I can joke about it now, but I genuinely look back at 13-year-old me, and of course I want to give myself a big hug, because I'm not surprised I couldn't leave the house anymore, because it was too much for me to emotionally handle back then.
I'll bet. You said on a lot of your LinkedIn posts that people have asked you about, cancer treatment, because they assume that your hair loss is associated with chemotherapy. What should they? Clearly they were wrong. What should they have actually said? What would have been a more positive experience for you to experience from them?
I think curiosity is totally normal. When we
Right.
see something that's different from the norm, and in this case, a lot of the time, like in fiction or any kind of media representation, when you see a bald woman, it tends to be in the context of somebody who is unwell or going through treatment. So I can totally understand how people jump to that conclusion. But that is partly why I show up in this world as a bald woman now, because there are
Right.
days when I don't want to, but I feel like at least if someone does ask me, I can say, no, I just have a condition called alopecia. It's autoimmune. It basically means my hair's been falling out since I was 13, but I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I think my biggest issue is when people approach me and it's not a question even, they're making a statement.
Right.
And that leads to a really uncomfortable interaction because they're showing their ignorance in the sense that we can all make assumptions from time to time, but they're showing that they haven't even considered that there might be another reason that I don't have hair. And they're not interested in learning from me as a person.
Right.
A lot of the time, people are coming to me, often having had an experience or know someone that has gone through cancer themselves. And they want to share with me their experience and they want to kind of create that sense of community. And I kind of sympathize with that. But what's uncomfortable about it is I almost feel I have to then belittle my experience because in comparison to cancer, I'm just like, oh no, it's just hair loss.
Yeah.
And it's not just hair loss, but I don't want to go into my whole life story and tell them how I missed a year of school and,
Mm.
how it's impacted my confidence every single day of my life, how it's ruined work opportunities, romantic opportunities, how I feel like there have been moments of discrimination against me for looking differently. I don't really want to go into that when I'm just buying some milk from my local shop.
Yeah.
But if people want to say, hey, oh, I've noticed you don't have any hair. Do you mind me asking, are you going through treatment or is there, ask me a question, sure. Because if I'm showing up in this world bald, I'm probably giving you a sign there that I am more comfortable now to speak to me about it compared to when I was wearing a wig for 20 odd years and I was terrified for someone to confront me about why I was wearing a wig.
Do you think, I mean, just build on that a minute. Do you think there are times, and I really struggle with this, when it's kind of okay to ask and not okay? I'm thinking about the difference between curiosity and intrusion, and obviously want to avoid intrusion, but be supportively curious if that exists as an expression.
Yeah, I think context is really important, especially if we're going to start thinking about how to approach it in the workplace.
Mm.
So, I mean, an obvious example of none of this is rocket science is if you are curious about me as a colleague and why I'm showing up to the workplace without hair, maybe in a one-to-one meeting, you can bring that up with me. Don't do it in an open plan office in front of colleagues, like when I'm not expecting it or when we're talking about work or something completely different. And I have had that happen. And I find that really unsettling because I understand you're curious, but you haven't let me mentally prepare. And maybe I don't want to talk about it in that moment,
Mm.
and I'm sure that will be the case for lots of other people. So I think just being an adult and knowing what's socially acceptable, and it's just don't spring questions on people. If there's a niggle in your brain and you're thinking, oof, you know, just listen to that gut for a second and think, well, maybe I'll log that question in my head. I really, really would love to learn more about that condition and that experience of my colleague, but maybe there's a better time to do that.
Sort of save it for later type thing.
100%.
So how can we, so if we've got, I lead a business, it's a small business, but we've got colleagues. And if we, because I've never done this actually, if someone's joining the team and they're a bit different, perhaps they don't have hair, or perhaps they have a disability, or perhaps something else, what's the right way as a leader we should be preparing colleagues, or should we be, for someone who might be joining us with a visible difference? Is there anything that we need to say? Is there anything that we shouldn't say? Is there some kind of balance in there somewhere?
So first off, I think it is totally individual. I'm speaking to you here as an expert on my own lived experience. In no way would I ever suggest I'm speaking on behalf of all the hairless women out there who might or might not work for you one day. And I think that's really important to remember. You've met one person today with alopecia. That doesn't mean you know and I know what everyone's going to want. And I think a really good indicator when you're hiring someone is, have you created an HR and recruitment process where there is clearly a safe space where they have felt able or wanted to declare, some visible differences cannot be disguised. I'm talking about if you've got a facial scar or burn or cleft lip, or, for many years I chose to assimilate and wear a wig and didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to declare it to colleagues. I didn't want to talk about it to my manager, and that was my choice. So I would have felt really uncomfortable if a recruiting manager or my line manager noticed and brought it up with me, because that wasn't my choice. So as difficult as that might sound as a concept, I think it's really important to let the individual with any kind of visible difference lead the conversation. And I know as a manager and as a recruiter, that can feel really passive, but there are other things that you can do to signalize that to that person that you are an organization that cares and has a diverse workforce and is open to those kind of conversations. And without being tokenistic about it, I mean, just think about in your images, both internal and external, do you have a mix of people with all sorts of different experiences that you're showing? And I know that's easier said than done, because it's the chicken and the egg, isn't it? The more you show that, the more likely you are to attract that kind of talent. Have internal talks and blogs from all sorts of different colleagues sharing different aspects of their life. There is more to life than our job title, isn't there? So show in your internal comms, and I'm saying this as someone who works in internal comms, I think it's really important. When I join an organization and go on the intranet page, I want to see what you're talking about. I want to see that there's safe spaces where people want to talk about their religion, their ethnicity, their hobbies. On day 2 of me starting my job, I was asked to do a blog introducing myself. We all do. And I took that as an opportunity to post a photo with me wearing a wig, one without, and one with me whipping it off. And I talked about the fact that this was my first time in a job choosing to ditch the wig. So it got it out there. It let me do it. And nobody asked me to do that. They asked me to complete a blog, but it was my choice to use that as a vehicle to have the conversation proactively.
And how do people react to that?
I got a couple of messages like, oh, it was really great. Like, they didn't even necessarily specifically talk about my alopecia. They were like, it was just really great to learn about you, loved the photos, or, so it was kind of implied that people, I could tell, were still sense checking.
Yeah.
But obviously I'm in a different position now because I'm very active in the last couple of years of talking about my alopecia. Like, it is something I do a lot. So I literally had a colleague come up to me in the office the other day and say, hey, were you on Radio 1 the other day? And I was like, yeah, why are you listening to Radio 1? They're like, oh, my 12-year-old daughter does. And I was like, there you go.
They're not in the target demographic.
No, without me being ageist to him, I was like, how do you know I was on that show? But yeah, like, I'm not saying to line managers be passive, because actually I think there are lots of ways, like I said, to be proactive in creating an appearance inclusive environment. But it's just maybe doing that in a subtle way in terms of your branding, internal and external, but also just reducing opportunity for bias in your recruitment itself. I think that's really important. And yeah, encouraging colleagues to just broaden their horizons by, again, whether it's through inviting external speakers in to talk about different experiences, or encouraging your colleagues to do it amongst themselves, so that then maybe people realize, oh, I've seen our new colleagues bald, but their first assumption isn't that I've started work going through chemotherapy.
Right.
Maybe it dawns on them, oh, I've heard about alopecia before. I wonder if that's it. I'm sure it will come up at some point. Great.
That was great when you talked about doing that blog and being very, wig on, wig off and very visible. I mean, are there any other sort of good elements of onboarding experiences you've had when you've gone into new roles that have really worked for you as someone with a visible difference?
It's difficult because for years I was wearing a wig and it was something that really worried me. I think the best thing I would like to see is a change in language, because visible difference as a term isn't one that is used a lot in any sector at the moment, it seems. And I don't feel like I fit into any tick box. My visible difference isn't protected under the Equality Act, for example. It's not a protected characteristic, but yet it is something I feel that I could be discriminated against. So there's a nuance there. And whilst I know you can't list every possible condition under the sun when you're talking to potential or existing colleagues, I think it is important to capture, or somehow in your recruitment comms and all those early stage onboarding things, just to reference that if there is anything that you want to talk about or declare, this is totally a safe space for you to do so. I wish I could say there's been a perfect onboarding experience. I guess the main thing is it's an experience where my first time going through interview processes as a bald woman, it's just instantly knowing I'm in a space where I have judged them to check how they're going to respond to me, showing up on Zoom or in person as a bald woman, and them creating a space where it doesn't feel like an issue. That is my test.
Right.
Like, if I see that they are physically shocked by the fact I'm popping up on Zoom with my big bald head, then I'm thinking, oh, there's an issue here. Or if
They're
they
sort of whispering behind their hand to each other. Oh, look.
kind of, like, or if they then start, I've had it before where, and luckily not in my current workplace, of course, but I've had it before where people seem to want to ask me about my health, and it seems really incongruous to anything else we're talking about. And so part of me is thinking, I wonder why they're asking me that question.
So dancing around the handbag almost, rather than showing that positive curiosity that you talked about earlier on.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Have you had any other sort of, again, so we can learn, any other really bad experiences, where you thought, oh, that was a real ouch moment?
Not in a work context as such. I've had many bad experiences and not just intrusive questions. A couple of weeks ago, I was in a public space in a train station, and I had a man reach his hand out as I walked past and said, "Can I stroke it?" about my head.
No way.
Yeah. And that for me is a real example of not seeing me as an individual, seeing something that he has not seen before, which is a proud bald woman rushing by in a train station, and just focusing on my difference and thinking somehow that it's in any way acceptable, regardless of whether I have hair or not, to intrude my personal space and try
Well,
and
I'll ask you, what did you say to him?
I just went, no. Carry on talking. Because I was so like taken aback. I was just
I'll
like,
bet.
what?
Why would you say that to someone?
Well, exactly. But it's I'm not unique in that. But if you try and compare that to, I know a lot of people in the Black community talk about how with certain hair types, people want to touch, for instance, Afro-Caribbean hair, and that's not acceptable. Or people who are pregnant with baby bumps and people don't ask permission and they just touch their belly,
Oh, goodness.
It's just all these things where it's just like, can we all just take a moment and just remember my body is my business. Really, you don't need to be asking me any question about how I look, and you certainly don't need to be putting your paws on me.
Goodness me. That's astounding, actually. Not in a good way. And I suppose it's not funny at all, really, but the way you say it sounds quite humorous, but it must be quite shocking when you're in that moment. But as you said, really taking you aback.
Yeah, I think if it was happening every single day, I would struggle with that.
Yeah.
Luckily, I make sure that I'm in spaces a lot where I feel comfortable to be myself and accepted, and spaces where it shouldn't matter that I'm bald, because at the end of the day, especially in the workplace, me having a bald head doesn't impact my ability to be an internal comms manager.
No.
It just doesn't. And that will be the case, I would hope you find, with anyone joining your company, for example, with a visible difference, however they choose to present with that, whether it's a skin difference and they choose to, use skin camouflage to disguise it, or whether they embrace it some days and not others, whatever it is, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be hiring them based on that or not. They will have nothing to do with what their output is in their job. And yet, unfortunately, there is evidence, like from the charity I do a lot of fundraising and campaigning with Changing Faces, that especially in like customer service roles, people with visible difference have been like actively discriminated against. Like even when they've been rejected from jobs, the feedback has been, we can't put someone with a face like yours in front of customers. And you just can't imagine it's 2023 and conversations like that are still happening, but they are.
Well, we've got to call it out if we see any of that, or it's not going to change. I mean, that's quite unthinkable, actually, that should happen, and that even then that's the feedback as well. Just it's ridiculous, actually, if I'm honest.
It is ridiculous, but that's why I was banging on about almost visible difference being in a bit of an uncomfortable place legally. And I think that is important when we talk about workplace, because it's all linked to HR, isn't it? And like, what are your responsibilities as an employer? And it's like, there's going to be grey areas sometimes, and it's just common sense, isn't it? Like, and there are definitely guidelines and principles. There's Queen Mary London University, they do a lot of research in their law department actually around like lookism, it's called, and guidelines for creating this appearance inclusive workplace. And those guidelines, again, like reading through them, it's so simple. It's like everything we've discussed already. But yeah, I just think sometimes employers need reminding, because we do all carry these unconscious biases day to day. And it's not just about calling other people out. We always think other people are the problem, but we are hardwired to make judgments about people day in, day out. It's just part of our evolution, our survival, you know. And it's really hard to unlearn that when somebody looks different, it doesn't make them bad, because media, films, newspapers, all of it is all telling us that difference is bad. Or, you know, think about all the villains you see in a James Bond film. I can guarantee you, if you think of any of them, they've probably got a visible difference, whether that's a bald head, a scar, you know, a burn, skin condition. They all have something that is shorthand for villainy. And I'm not Dr. Evil sitting there with my cat on my lap at work. I can guarantee you that.
I suppose in a way that's, as you say, that's being reinforced all the time through people's lives in a very almost subliminal way, perhaps not deliberately, perhaps deliberately, I don't know, but it's a real kind of, I think you said you've got to almost start to unlearn some of the things that you've learned. And one of the things that strikes me listening to you talk is that we all know there's a real, it's really tough to bring talent into organizations at the moment. It's very much an employee's market. And if you are making someone feel unwelcome, even if that's not deliberate, you are wasting the potential to have that talent in your organization. So being, I'm a business person, we run a small business, I wouldn't want to waste an opportunity to hire and keep good talent. And I was going to say I don't care. I do care, but I have no, it's the talent that I'm after. If I say not the body, do you know what I mean? When I say
Yeah,
that.
but that is, I think that's totally the right approach, isn't it? Like, we shouldn't be making decisions in our recruitment about people's background or facial features or body types. That is all bias. That is all, you know, they should be nameless applications, photoless applications. In many ways, there's arguments, I think, sometimes that, you know, there could be a category when you're recruiting that's that personal thing, like, you know, did you have good rapport with them, like in an interview, how did you get on? But that should be a separate question box almost, that's marked out of 5, and very separate to the rest, that should just be very objective skills based questions. And when you say it out loud, again, it makes sense, but it's so obvious how these things do slip in, and we go with our gut feeling about people, but that gut can be misleading us sometimes.
Can I ask you a sort of different question? I think so people are busy and we all make mistakes. Sometimes we don't approach a situation in the right way and something might come out wrong. So if I were to meet you for the first time, and if I say put my foot in it, say something that I didn't mean to be unkind, but what's the right way for me to fix that? How do I, because I don't want to create upset and unpleasantness for someone. I want to kind of fix it. Can I fix it if I say, if I, for example, said to you, you know, are you on cancer treatment? I mean, I wouldn't, but if I had, and then I would be mortified to think how much I would have hurt your feelings by saying that. Can I fix that, or is that unfixable once I've said it?
I think with anything, it always helps to think before you speak. But of course, there are going to be moments where we all make mistakes. Believe me, I'm a very chatty Cathy, and I have put my foot in it lots of times, as my friends tell me. So
Right.
I'm not perfect, you know. I think taking a moment to stop and acknowledge, especially if I reacted badly to that, you're probably going to see. But even if I didn't betray on my face my reaction, if you, as soon as you said it, had that moment, or even 2 days later, you've had that realization, contact me, drop me an email, say, hey, can I just I just wanted to have a chat. I realized that question I asked you, that was probably quite intrusive, and I really think I phrased it wrong. Can I just check that you're okay? And I really want to clarify, my intent there was not to make you feel uncomfortable. And I've really been reflecting on it, and I want to do better so I don't put anyone else in that situation. I think that would endear me and warm me and encourage me far more, because also I feel like, well, good, he's not going to make that mistake again. But I think, I know this gets people out of a lot of stuff, but I think intent is really important. I have had lots of colleagues there are terms we all use in daily life. And I'm thinking, like, colleagues, when they joke about, oh, don't worry, I'll get out of your hair. I've had people say that to me, then go, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, obviously they're not trying to bully me or like make a joke. They've just, because it's a non-issue, they've just forgotten. And I can laugh with them and it's whatever. But so I don't think it's not about being overly woke or careful. And I know people get a bit frustrated when it feels like we're all walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
I think it's all about the approach and the intent and acknowledging that we're not always going to get it right. But the fundamental thing is, it's about you and that other person that you're speaking to. That might not faze me at all. And I've had it where someone's come up to me and apologized and I said, don't even give it a second thought. I would let you know if I had felt uncomfortable, but thank you for checking in with me. And that's the end of it. But maybe I would come back to you and say, yeah, it really hurt my feelings. How can we go forward with this to ensure you don't do it again? And then I just want to know that you're addressing it. And that's fine too.
I guess what you're saying is if as a manager we think we've messed it up, then don't put your head in a bucket, don't ignore it, try and fix it with humility.
Yes, 100%. And I think don't go into the panic mode that people do of, again, I know I'm not, I've always been a little cog in a big organization almost, but don't hide behind HR or panic. I think at the end of the day, the best thing we can all do is just be human about these things, because when I turn up at work, I'm not suddenly a different person. My concerns and fears about being a bald woman in this world don't suddenly go out the window. If anything, sometimes it feels like they're intensified because I'm seeing these same people every day. But equally now, post-pandemic, maybe I go into the office once or twice a month. So there are always new people I'm seeing or people I haven't had that conversation with yet. And yeah, it's never going to be perfect. Humans are flawed. But I really don't think me having a bald head is a flaw. I think how society responds to me having a bald head and making me feel like that makes me different is the issue.
Right, so it's interesting. It's brilliant to talk to you, and you're obviously a really strong and really confident person now, which feels quite different from how you described when you were a teenager, a 13-year-old. You didn't want to go out of the house and go to school. What's kept you strong? How have you been able to become the person that you now are?
Honestly, I'd say community. The whole reason that after 2 decades of wearing a wig and being terrified to talk about my hair loss, and I mean like going through all of higher education, never taking my wig off, even with housemates, barely, not talking about it in relationships, never declaring it in the workplace. The thing that changed was the pandemic for me, because all of a sudden we were all at home. And at home, I was always bald Laura because it was my safe space to be comfortable, to be myself. As soon as I stepped outside the front door, it was hair on, makeup on. This is how I have to present to the world to be accepted. Right. And somehow, during the pandemic, I think much like the way that, everyone started wearing jogging bottoms down below because you can't see that on the Zoom, I was whipping my wig on and off in between meetings. And I was like, oh, it's flipping joyful to have a break from wearing this hat of hair all day long. And I think I just started realizing, God, it has been exhausting to feel like there's a secret side of me, a side that I'm so terrified for people to know about. And I almost can't understand the mindset I was in now, because I am prepared to sit here in front of a big window and my neighbours going by and see me. But I used to have my curtains down. That's how severe my phobia was of being seen bald. So yeah, for me, the pandemic allowed me to have more time just being bald Laura in my own space. Then workplace kind of came into my home life, so it started to break down those boundaries. And then the biggest thing for me to become as confident as I am was realizing all the energy I was wasting in disguising that part of myself was so much better spent in embracing it. And when I searched for that hashtag alopecia on social media, and like all of a sudden it was like the curtains coming up in every aspect, because I saw a massive community online of women, men, children, adults, all embracing at different stages of their alopecia or different types of hair loss. And it just blew my mind, because for 20 years, I'd felt like I was the only one struggling with these feelings. And either, making a mountain out of a molehill, people were like, oh, it's just hair. Or the other extreme was people saying to me, oh yeah, no, I can never imagine going bald. It would be the worst thing in the world. Like, it was two extremes. And all of a sudden there was a community that just got it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that was the change, finding people and creating my own little safe bubble where, like we talked about, representation day to day doesn't exist for happy, healthy bald women. I've never seen that in my life. So I've curated my own newsfeed. I'd suggest other people do the same. Broaden your horizons. And beyond that, I've realized I'm not just someone with hair loss. I'm someone who's part of a visible difference community. I'm a woman. I'm part of the LGBT community. All these things where you realize everything intersects. And I'm not just one thing. I'm all these things. And it's just really nice to get to meet people that I probably would never have met if I was just working in my office and limiting my sphere.
Well, I'm really pleased we've got to meet you today. Have you got any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap up the podcast?
Oh, final thoughts for the listeners.
If you were to leave us with one or two things, say, if you've got a visible difference, whatever you do this or don't do that. Have you got any of those?
I think if you're living with a visible difference of any kind or anything, hidden or visible, that you feel makes you different or has made you feel lesser, just stop for a second and really put that into context and think, wait, is this thing that I have or experience or that I'm ashamed of, is this the problem? Or is it how I fear people are going to respond to it? Because you're stressing and worrying about the thing that hasn't happened yet. I just think it's about prioritizing your energy and your happiness into just unapologetically showing up as you want to be. And I know in the workplace now we all talk about be your authentic self, but it's true. It really is that. Like, you shouldn't have to be a different person at work, whether that's how you speak, how you perform, how you dress. Obviously, there's professionalism, but what does that even mean? Me being a bald woman, for years, I thought that wasn't professional. And then I thought, hang on a second, who is anyone to say that what's on my head or not makes me able to do my job or not? So ultimately, final words for anyone listening is you do you and never be ashamed to exist in this world as you are.
Fantastic. Really powerful statement. Laura, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing some of life's lessons with us that we can all learn from. I've certainly learned a lot from talking to you today, and I'm very, very grateful for you spending time with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you once again for being part of the Unlocking Workplace Wellbeing podcast from Verve Healthcare. If you want to improve well-being in your workplace through structured access to mental health support, physiotherapy, GPs, or how to manage personal finances in a better way, then we've probably got a solution for you. So we've got a proactive approach which gets right to the heart of the problem. Give us a call or visit us on vervehealthcare.co.uk, and please be sure to subscribe to this podcast.